Alright guys, this is my last bookcase show and tell, and because this is a very tall bookcase, it's easier for me to just do it this way without me being in it. Hopefully you don't miss my face too much. There's tons of pictures everywhere of it. So on this top shelf I have this painting, which is actually it's still for sale, but moving my Phantom of the Opera miniature bear. We have Piercing the Darkness, Underground with Vampires in America Today. We have Dracula's Brood by Richard Dalby. We have Vampires, edited by Alan Ryan. A Clutch of Vampires, which I believe is edited by Raymond McNally. I might possibly own these three books almost exclusively because they're illustrated by Edward Gorey. We have Origins of Popular Superstitions and Customs. We have Vampires, Burial, and Death. This is actually a really interesting one if you want to know the history of why vampires have the mythology they do, especially in Slavic regions. I've mentioned this book before. It's actually one of my favorite reference books, which is the Encyclopedia of Vampires, Werewolves, and Other Monsters, which if you want to know more about those subjects, that's a very good leaping off point. This is the Vampire book, the Encyclopedia of the Undead, from the same publishing company, the Werewolf book. This one I got from a used bookstore in Savannah, and this one of my professors was throwing it out, so I snatched that up. The Complete Book of Werewolves. This one's actually pretty cool, which is Brereton's Phantasmagoria, a compendium of monsters, myths, and legends, which I ended up finding at Barnes & Noble. Excuse the duck, my mom brought that back from one of her trips. And then we have Myths, Tales of the Greek and Roman Gods from Lucia and Peluso. I believe I got that from the Metropolitan. So then down here, onto the next shelf, we have The Complete Sandman, volumes 1 through 3. Because these books are very big, very expensive, I have to get them slowly, one at a time, when I actually have the money for them. So the first two were Christmas gifts, and then the third one I bought some months back. Hopefully I'll have all 5 eventually. And then over in here, these are very tightly jammed in here, so I can't actually pull them out. So I can't even remember what this first one is. But this is the telling of Rapunzel that I grew up with, where like she falls out of the tower and the guy that she falls in love with is blinded and it's kind of dark. But then after that is Perrault's Fairy Tales. And then the Far Side Gallery 3, which is a Christmas present many years ago. And then these are actually some of the things that taught me how to draw and how to make things in clay. So there's clay characters for kids, there's the Art of Polymer Clay for the first time, Drawing Fairies, A Believer's Guide by Christopher Hart. That one I never was too fond on, but Watercolor Fairies from David Ricci and Anna Franklin was one of the biggest things that taught me how to do watercolor. And How to Draw and Paint Fairies by Linda Ravenscroft was another very favorite early on thing to learn how to paint. Creating Creatures of Fantasy and Imagination is really good for making semi-realistic looking things. Keys to Painting Fur and Feathers was also really good for helping how to make textures be more believable. This is another little painting that's still available in my Etsy shop. Going down again, we have 100 Wicked Little Witch Stories. We have Magic in the Mirror Stone. We have Carney Punk. We have Fairy Tales, we have Penny Dreadfuls, we have Great Horror Stories, we have 666, 29 original tales of horror and suspense, Vampires, Wine, and Roses. These are all short story collection books. This was actually a really cool one. I really want to look through this more. I've only glanced through it so far. As The Occult, Witchcraft and Magic and Illustrated History. This is actually a pretty solid reference material if you want to use it for beginners witchcraft stuff. Beyond the Dark Veil is all post-mortem photography, which I've had an interest in for several years, and this is just a beautiful book that I happened to find secondhand because apparently someone else didn't want it. I don't even know what this is. I grabbed this for free somewhere. This is The Complete Varney the Vampire, which I apparently forgot that Varney was a very long-running serial and has about 1,400 pages in there. The King in Yellow from Robert W. Chambers is supposed to be a really great horror story. I also have Hannibal and Silence of the Lambs, neither of which I've read yet, but have had on the shelf for ages. The Doll People was a favorite from when I was young. Wicked, which I got for like 50 cents at a Goodwill and completely forgot I had. Going down another shelf, we have Behind a Mask, the Unknown Thrillers of Louisa May Alcott, which I had on another shelf but moved over here so it would be with Little Women, which I also haven't read. The Decline and Fall of the Romantic Ideal, which I still could not tell you what the hell that is about. Mark Twain and Southwestern Humor. A Tale of Two Cities, because I think I have 3 copies of that. The Andromeda Strain, a first edition that my dad bought in college. And then Michael Crichton, Pirate Latitudes, which was the last book he wrote before his death. I might have mentioned it, but I seriously had a big obsession with Michael Crichton when I was in like 7th to 9th grade. So I read almost all of his books. Gil Elvgren, aka one of the greatest pinup artists of all time. I really love his style and he's influenced a lot of my art, especially when it comes to pinup. And then these, I'm sure these are familiar to some people. These are all first printings I bought as they came out before I stopped noticing what was coming out. But Monsterology, Mythology, Egyptology, the Egyptology Handbook, the Piratology Handbook. This is actually a pirate ship model made out of cardboard. Piratology, the Wand Maker's Guidebook, Wizardology, A Guide to Wizards of the World, the Wizardology Handbook, Dragonology, which actually has a bunch of tiny models. No, this actually has a dragon model, which I have assembled and is hanging from my ceiling. Dragonology, Field Guide to Dragon, this is the one that has the tiny models. Dragonology, which when I found that in 6th grade was like my light and joy, and then the Dragonology Handbook is way back in there. So yeah, these are slightly embarrassing, but I can't bear to part with them. Down onto the last shelf, we have the complete works of William Shakespeare. I've had that since I was like 10, and I haven't read as much of it as I would like to have. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. The Mists of Avalon, I've had that forever, and I cannot bring myself to read it for some reason, though I want to. The Discovery of Witches, Shadow of Night, and the Book of Life. I really liked the first one and then fell off in the middle of the second one and haven't gotten back to reading them because I just lost interest. 13+1 by Edgar Allan Poe. This was just a gift from a friend. The Woman in Black by Suzanne Hill. Children of the Night by Dan Simmons. Moon by James Herbert. The Traveling Vampire Show by Richard Mayman. A Slam Dunk, which for some reason I have 2 copies of this, which is actually written by my high school English teacher. And then I grew up with an intense love of Cornelia Funk's books. For some reason, The Thief Lord is not in here, but I have Inkheart, Inkspell, Ink Death, Reckless, and Dragonheart. And so I grew up with all of those. Anyway, this was the final book show and tell. In all likelihood, I will be getting more books in the future because I always am. But hopefully you could see all of them this time properly. Till next time, Darklings.